welcome at Global Perspectives and to our new digital exchange format, Global Perspectives On. The idea of that format is to highlight developments relevant to Europe and Africa, to feature decision makers from both continents, to raise awareness for issues that are often neglected but have great potential to create win-win situations for Africa and Europe. So in this edition of Global Perspectives On, we will focus on forestry, how forestry can be a catalyzer for economic and social political development, because forestry is not just about planting trees, it is also about economic and social impact. And this is why it said in our invitation, from trees to transformation, sustainable forestry as a driver for change. Thank you for joining, and to everyone listening, you are cordially invited to participate by posting your questions in the Q&A, or if you wish to say something, please give us a sign in the Q&A section, and we will answer your questions during the discussion or at the end at the latest. My name is Gregor Darmer. I'm one of Global Perspective CEOs, and I will moderate today's session, in which we want to explore the chances that come with forestry in the fight against climate change and poverty, chances for Africa's economic development, and for the local communities. We want to explore why sustainable forestry can be also an attractive investment for European stakeholders, and the status of agroforestry on the continent. So quite an ambitious agenda. And I'm happy that we have the chance to discuss all these different aspects with two distinguished guests, Professor Hamadi Boga and Andreas Rickert. Andreas Rickert is co-CEO at Nixdorf Kapital and CEO of Fineo, and as such, to be 100% transparent, member of the Global Perspective Initiative Advisory Board. He worked for McKinsey, the World Bank, the Bertelsmann Foundation, and in an article by Brand 1, he was recently described as Robin Hood, being a bridge between wealthy entrepreneurs and non-profit organizations, channeling financial resources to where they are needed most for social and ecological transformation. Andreas, thank you for being with us today, and we are curious to hear and learn more about your life as modern Robin Hood and how this goes in line with sustainable forestry. But before doing so, I would still like to introduce Professor Hamadi Boga. He's former Principal Secretary of the State Department for Agricultural Research in Kenya's Ministry of Agriculture, and currently Vice President at the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, short AGRA. Thank you, Hamadi, also for being with us today. And I would like to start with you, Hamadi, actually, by setting the scene. So, when you look at the current status of reforestation in Kenya and beyond, maybe you can give us an overview what role forestation initiatives play on the continent.
Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity to share the different perspectives from Africa, from Kenya. AGRA works in 15 African countries. Most of them in sub-Saharan Africa. So we have the region of Western Africa, where we have 4 countries right now, and Eastern Africa and Southern Africa. Our main focus is agricultural development. But lately, because of the impact of agriculture on the environment and on biodiversity, we have included a business line that is called sustainable farming systems, which include also agroforestry and other sustainable farming practices. And this work is mainly supported by KfW and IKEA Foundation. So we are engaging with the different countries, the 15 countries that we support, around policies that will affect especially sustainable farming, with a clear focus on supporting agroforestry, but also making sure that agricultural activities have limited impact on the environment. When it comes to forestry and agriculture in Africa, it's an area of tension, an area of conflict between humans and the environment, because there's pressure for population, the population is growing, and so there's pressure for settlement as well as pressure for land for use in agriculture. And this has led to a lot of encroachment, either into catchment areas where the forests serve as water catchment areas, or into rangeland areas where the rangeland serve as habitat for most of the wildlife and nature reserve. And this has also led to conflict with the wildlife, human-wildlife conflict, because now the farmers and the wildlife, there's a conflict on land use. And while working in the Ministry of Agriculture, there was a lot of political conversations, especially coming from the Ministry of Environment, about reforestation programs and making sure that we planted trees. But on the other side, there was a push for more land for agriculture. So this was an area of policy tension between the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources. And I always tried to bridge this so that we had a more multidisciplinary, multi-institutional approach, working together for landscape restoration, as well as reforestation programs. So, for example, in a country like Kenya, the constitution says we should have 10% tree cover. So there was a push for that. And some of the policies and laws prescribed that we should be planting trees. Right now, there is a target of about 15 billion trees that are to be planted. This target was set by the president by 2030. And the 10% tree cover has been increased to about 15% tree cover, which everybody is trying to attain. I think the most important thing is the fact that there is need for coordination of these efforts. There is need for a unifying policy and unifying approaches. There is need for data and information, especially from the R&D institutions. And there is need for supporting the departments that are responsible for this with capacity building. And then there is a need for really understanding the needs of the communities, because that is where the tension is, so that we can reconcile the needs for livelihood as well as the need of having the forest there for ecosystem services. So you find in some of the areas, some of the forests we have worked in, myself, are the cloud forests in Taita Taveta, which are on top of hills and which are critical for providing water and ecosystem services, but which have been encroached. And in the end, it undermines the livelihood. So talking to the community and communicating that properly, I think, is a very critical area where government sometimes fail because they have more the enforcement approach, which sometimes comes into clashes with communities, leading to criminalization of livelihoods, and therefore creating a lot of unnecessary tension. And I think fueling a lot of illegal logging, illegal activities, because most of the things are not being done on the surface transparently with a clear plan. So I think for now, that is what I could say, and I'm open to further probing.
Well, thank you already for that picture and for, saying where tension is, and that it's also about conflicts and also articulating needs. So later on, I'm looking forward that we can actually address the issues you mentioned. And from what I understood, you said, that government capacities are also limited. So maybe private investors or actors play a crucial role. And that's why I would like to bring you in, Andreas, because I know you have been to Ethiopia recently to visit a forestation project by ASC that Nixdorf Kapital supports. So maybe you can tell us why, and actually also explain how forestry investment works and, the role that private investors can actually play in this picture that Hamadi just described.
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for having me. It's a great format, and Hamadi already said that. So we need all the different players at the table. And this is something I deeply believe in. So we cannot solve the issues out there just by philanthropy. Also, governments won't be able, or multinational organizations won't be able to solve all issues. So we also need the private sector. And ideally, we combine all three sectors. So we have civil society, we have the public side, and we have the private sector. And if we do that, then maybe let me start with that clear statement at the beginning. We can also read the SDGs not only as a list of challenges, but also the SDGs provide opportunities for economic growth, but also for a sustainable future. So how do you do that? You said that ASC is having a forestry program. Just a few more words about the setup. ASC is an investment firm, and they are working on the platform of Nixdorf Kapital. So you mentioned that at the beginning, I'm co-CEO of Nixdorf Kapital. So we are having impact investing funds across different asset classes, and one of our funds is ASC. So you can see we are coming from the private sector, but with a clear normative positioning, so that we would like to drive positive impact by mobilizing investment funds from the private sector. So this is the overarching topic. Looking at the specific fund, and I already would like to mention one number at the beginning. So we have done the first closing of 30 million euros. So we are not just talking about it, we are already investing, and we have just started. What is the situation when we look at it? So most of the countries in Africa are importing wood. And this is out of many reasons quite a disaster. The wood is imported from countries where forestry is usually growing quite slowly. So from the Nordics, from Russia, from Europe, etc. So we are taking out biomaterial from countries where it's difficult to restore it. Secondly, you pay the so-called poverty premium. So that means the wood you're using for construction, for example, in many African countries is even more expensive than we pay it here in Europe or in Germany, because you have the prices, regular market prices, plus the logistics. So both arguments are quite striking in the sense that why don't you have a local production of forestry? And this is exactly what we're doing and what ASC is doing. So currently, they are ramping up forestry productions in 3 different countries. So one is Ethiopia, and as you mentioned, I was there visiting the region. Secondly, Angola, and thirdly, Congo. So in these 3 countries, we are starting with forestry. What makes it specific? It's important that we are talking about impact investing. And that means we are active on 2 different levels. So we would like to have a positive impact, and I will dive into that. What does it mean? And secondly, we also need sustainability in the sense of the financial return, because we are now using not money from foundations, etc., or governmental money. We're using money from the private market. So what does the impact mean? So when you hear forestry, the first thing which pops up is CO2 capture. And yes, it is about CO2 capture. So this is one of our dimensions. But in total, we have described a set of 160 KPIs to understand what is the impact we're having when we're doing forestry large scale in different countries. So CO2 capture is one, which is a no-brainer, but we also look at the dimension of different other ecological aspects. So biodiversity. So it's not only one sort, we're having a lot of different tree sorts which we are using now in the region. We look at the quality of the soil. We look at water usage, because when we are having a forestry plantation, we also have to make sure that we are using in a sustainable way the water which is in the region. So these are just examples for the ecological part. Then when it comes to the social part, we are in quite rural areas. And as I said, I was visiting it. So we are looking at what does it mean when we have economic growth in a region which is quite rural. So we have been in very intense discussions, not me myself, but the team with the local communities. So for many years, they have built up a good relationship to them. So we have completely the buy-in. And also, Hamadi said that, so that the communities are playing a vital role So the teams have built up over many years a good and strong relationship with the villages in the region, and they're supporting it, and they're welcoming the support, as well as with the regional government, which is completely supportive for what we do. So we are really engraved in the local structures, and then means that we are not only doing the plantation, but we are really developing the entire region. So just to give you a few examples, we are building a bridge, because at the moment,
Andreas, before you continue, that, because I would really like to elaborate further on, the social consequences and the positive effect it has, but just to be really clear and make sure that everyone understood it. And at this point, once again, all those who are listening are invited to ask their question. But you mentioned, the SDGs and CO2 certificates, but just so we all understand it, what are the benefits for the investors? Are it the CO2 certificates, or is it long-lasting products, timber for house construction, furniture? I mean, what are the attractive returns actually for those who invest?
Yeah. Now, it's a good question, because as I said, so we are aiming at both dimensions. So the impact, and I have to describe a little bit of the impact dimension, but also the economic case. And just to give you a number, so the team has calculated an annual IRR of 18%. So this is quite attractive also for investors. And it's on top completely secured by a MIGA, which is a division of the World Bank, so for unsecurities. So this is the investment case purely from the perspective of a financial return. So that's quite attractive. The return is mainly resulting out of just selling the wood. So you can use it mainly for construction, for local construction, etc. And as I said at the beginning, if you look at the market situation, if you just sell it for the regular market prices and maybe even below, it's very attractive to produce it locally, which is not included yet. And you mentioned that CO2 certificates. This will come on top. So the financial return might even be higher due to more CO2 certificates. But this is what we are really looking at. So we have a very sustainable, attractive financial case. And this is also relevant for the investors, so that we can mobilize funds and resources from investors, in this case, mainly from Germany, but also having a very holistic perspective on the impact and really covering the entire spectrum from the local management, which we are hiring, building the infrastructure, so building a bridge very concretely, but also taking care of the healthcare situation for our employees, but also their families in the region. So hopefully, by this investment, we are lifting up the entire region ecologically, socially, and also from the ecological point of view. And this is what, for me, impact investing meant. No, fine, go ahead.
One last question on that before I would like to hear your perspective, Hamadi, on the described investment. So how difficult is it actually to convince people to invest in this kind of sustainable forestry? Is it, widely accepted, or does it take a lot of efforts to convince people in, investing in this model that you just described?
It's a good question, and it's also a little bit frustrating, because when you look at it from do you also hear the echo?
No.
Okay, then it's good. Okay, so when I look at the investment case, it's extremely attractive. So we have 18%, as I said, so it's secured via the MIGA. It's a very positive impact case. So to invest into such an investment vehicle should be a no-brainer. The truth is, to raise the first 30 million was not that easy. And the reasons are on different levels. And I really have to say that also quite clearly, whenever we talk about investments in Africa, many investors are still reluctant. And they are not immediately convinced that it's a good idea, because they do not feel safe. So this is the first thing, and we have to take that into account, even though we provide the security via the MIGA. And secondly, we are not big enough to attract institutional investors. So all the money we have at the moment is coming from private sources like with wealthy families, family offices. But the next step should be that we also have the pension funds of the world investing into such things. But they are at the moment mainly looking at larger investments. And so we are not really in their scope yet. So these are the two hurdles which we have seen. So there is still some reluctancy when it comes to investment in Africa. And secondly, that we need also the big institutional investors. But now we have a starting point, the 30 million are there, and that hopefully will also show to other investors that they should join. And I'm quite optimistic that we will raise much more in the future.
Thank you. So now, you mentioned already that there are also certain risks associated maybe with this investment. I would like to hear your perspective, Hamadi, on this kind of investment that Andreas just described. What advantages do you see? But maybe also, you mentioned it at the beginning, that it's a conflict area. What risk do you see also? Maybe also from an agricultural point of view.
Yeah, I think very interesting proposals, because in the past, the kind of investments that we have attracted are mainly for agricultural land, especially from the Gulf countries who are looking for land to grow food for the Gulf and other areas. And it received a lot of resistance because Africa itself was struggling with food security issues. And so it was not received very well, not locally, but even at the global level. I think most civil society were seeing that as a land grab. Now, the thing with this investment, I think for it to really succeed is there a policy framework for it in the different government to support this kind of investments? Because it looks like an innovative idea, but it needs to be anchored in some law within the country to attract investors in that area. And what that means needs to be defined in law, and not at the national level alone, but also at the regional level, because land in most cases is a local issue in most African societies. Either they're controlled by chiefs or they're controlled by the county governments. And so the national government sometimes is a tension point between the national government and local government around land, for access to land for any types of investment, not just for...
Maybe we can dive in this land question, but before doing so, someone else joined, Tilahun Amede, a colleague of yours from Accra. Welcome, and thank you also for joining in. You are the Director for Climate Change, Sustainable Productivity and Resilience at Accra. Thank you for being with us as well. And we are just talking about the land, and that was actually a question I also wanted to ask you, Andreas. How do you identify the land that can be used for your forestry project? I mean, Hamadi just mentioned it, they are local actors, but how does that work? How does one have to imagine? Do you approach the local actors and then talk to the national government, or is it the other way around? So maybe you could also give us a little insight on how that actually works.
Yeah, I mean, I have to clearly say the credits go to the team which is on the ground. So I didn't do all the conversations, they did. And as I said at the beginning, they built a relationship over years. And they built the relationships on two different levels. So one is to the local communities, to the villages, and really working with them on the plans and also understanding what are their needs. So I mentioned the bridge. Yes, we also need the bridge to, at the end of the day, do the transportation of the produced wood. But also, it's a huge advantage for the villages, because by that they can really bypass a situation which they're currently facing, that they have to take long distances to go from one side to the other. So understanding what are the local needs and getting their buy-in and really doing something for them on the ground. And then the other layer is that they have been in long discussions with the president of the local government. And also he was extremely supportive because he understood that we are not just there for doing revenues, but we are thinking in a very long-term perspective and very sustainable. So how we are building that also, that when we do the harvesting, that we are always leaving also wood and other plants in there, so that the growth will continue even after the time of our investment period. And this was, I think, the game-changing aspect that the team has built the relationships on both levels, and only by doing that in a dual way, we got the support from everyone who is involved. And maybe I should mention one more thing, because Hamadi mentioned that also we are using the land which is being provided. Actually, in Ethiopia, at least this is where I know it, it's provided for free from the government because they are so convinced. 80% is for forestry, 20% is also for food production. So we also, in this case, have a mixture of the usage, which is also beneficial for the local people.
Actually, talking about land, I'm just checking the Q&A section. I don't know if all of you see it as well, but there's one question coming in regarding land. And the question is, are there measures taken to avoid conflicts with regard to land usage or land grabbing? Considering the rates of return on investment, it could cause more harm, increasing the gender divide and availability of fertile land for food production. One question coming from the audience. Who would like to react on that?
Maybe I can start.
I can come in.
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Hello, please.
Ja, guten Tag, ich heiße Tilahun. Ich habe in Deutschland studiert. I'm sorry, I'm coming from a different meeting. So, you know, the issue is, one is to understand why really deforestation is happening largely in Africa. It's largely happening in Africa because farmers are not producing enough food in the farm they have. So they keep opening up new land. And partly it's the effect of not accessing the right technologies, the right input, the right management option. And when you see the African continent, you have different types of land tenure systems. In some systems, particularly in Southern Africa, you have, you know, land tenure mainly managed by chiefdoms, local, you know, administrations, whereby, you know, the management is really not formal, doesn't follow any regulatory systems. So you see a lot of land conversion from forest to other services. And then you see also then more of public-owned lands where you have, you know, investments coming into the continent, take land, and then, you know, deforest. And then you don't see that system of investment progressing, and somebody will go and abandon it and have then farmers come in to continue that farming. And then you have the third system, which is more of regulated, planned, which is guided by policy. So the effect of all these different land use systems and policies associated with them are, you know, affecting how the forest system is sustainably managed and how really deforestation is really reduced. So the conflict usually, you know, is because of these different user groups. Yeah, you have user groups that are coming for immediate use, are not regulated, and then you have those communities who feel that they don't get the benefits out of it immediately. They don't have the right incentives, be it the market incentives or the non-timber products that are coming from forests that are benefiting communities and are really bringing in the livestock into the system, slowly opening up new land from the forest areas. So the whole divide is, you know, partly because of failure of the national policies. and policies that are coming and going. And I'm not
So
interested
talking about policy
by
still,
the
I don't want to
respective
interrupt
countries.
you, but there's a question coming on from a colleague from the German Center for Integration and Migration, exactly on policy frameworks. And he's asking, how can policy frameworks be restructured to not only recognize and support the conservation efforts of local communities who earn their livelihoods through sustainable practices like beekeeping without harming the forest, but also ensure their equitable inclusion in global carbon markets, thus moving away from criminalizing their traditional livelihoods? Quite a long question. I hope you got it, but I think that goes in line with what you just started to say about the policy framework. And maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on how these policies need to be restructured or need to be designed, that they are really also beneficial
Yes,
for the
thank
local
you.
communities.
Yeah, you know, we in Africa don't have a problem of policies. The issue we have is about implementing those policies in most cases, making them work. And regardless of the policy we have, unless people are getting the benefits out of it, the incentives to get out of those forest management, be it in timber or non-timber products, it's very difficult to really enforce them. And as you know, the incentives out there, be it the carbon market, which is not really accessible to African markets, you know, probably less than 1% of 3% of the whole, you know, voluntary market is going to Africa. So, and it's partly also related to creating the capacity of communities to follow the rules, to develop the regulatory and the monitoring systems. And all that it should be part of the package of the policy. So policy alone, declaration alone will not solve the problem unless we put really critical instruments on the ground to help communities benefit out of them so that they follow the policies and the regulations.
Andreas, what's your experience with, you know, coming from the outside and hearing that implementation of policies is a problem? I just wonder, how do you, I mean, we're having discussions about, you know, decolonialization and so on. Is it somehow difficult or strange, or how is it perceived if, you know, European investors are coming in and now also want to be part of the game in a way to discuss the policies and so on? How does it work on the ground actually, so that it is also well accepted and it is really an inclusive process? As you described it at the beginning, you said, you know, it needs all actors on the table, but how is it implemented? How does it work? How do you perceive this?
Yeah, I mean, good thing is we had a team on the ground, because at the end of the day, it's also a matter of trust. Yes, we need the policies, we need regulation, etc. But what I heard from the teams is that the most important point was trust. And they also probably, I mean, you mentioned that also due to the history, and also that in particular in the region where we're active in Ethiopia, there have been investors also making promises that they are doing reforestation, but that they did at the end of the day, they just took out the wood and they never really started any reforestation. So this was the starting point, that they also, in particular in the region, had made very bad experiences with investors coming from outside. So that is why also the entire process took a few years. And the few years were necessary not just to sign the contract. This is done easily, not just to refer to existing regulations and laws, but to rebuild the trust which had been so far also be disrupted in the region. And once we had that, or the team had rebuilt the trust, it was necessary, and we heard that also from the others, to make sure that everybody is benefiting from these investments. So it's not only, as I said, so that the returns go to the investors mainly coming from outside, but really to make sure that the local communities gain something out of it, and not only job creation, but also that rebuilding the infrastructure, setting up a healthcare system, etc. And even more importantly, because we also heard something about equality, gender equality, building up local managements, which are somehow including all relevant stakeholders from the regions. So this is why it took so long, but I think the time was very wisely invested. And again, we need the regulation so we can count on, but we also need the trust which has been built over time.
Thank you. Hamadi, you said at the beginning that there is nevertheless that forestry and agriculture is an area of tension and conflict. And I would like to come back on your entry statement and how both can go in line, agriculture and forestry. Often we can read the keyword agroforestry. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on that and how we can maximize the benefits of both, forestry and agriculture.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is for governments, both national and local governments, to map out the landscape to make sure that sensitive areas, especially catchment areas, are protected and are not deforested, because when they are not protected and they are deforested, it destabilizes the whole hydroecology of the place. And so that farming activities can also be restricted to areas that are ecologically suited for farming. And when farming, whether forest products or agriculture products, then it should be guided by a certain level of research and development and good agricultural practices that also combine the use of trees, including fruit trees, into the farming systems, so that people are not just embracing monoculture and engaging in practices that lead to soil erosion and deforestation and loss of biodiversity. And I think in the past, care was not taken about this. Increasingly, governments are being proactive about this, communities are being educated about this. And I think community education is a very important pillar. So strong extension systems that are not just prioritizing seeds and agrochemicals, but also agroforestry as a component of the farming systems, also availing inputs to support the agroforestry. So the right trees for the right kind of environment with the right products at the end also being very critical. In Kenya, we have the benefit of having the International Center for Agroforestry Research. The headquarters is there, and it has been spearheading the development of solutions for farmers. And we have seen a lot of adoption of agroforestry. I think the other thing that has been a challenge is the tension between exotic trees, so the trees from Europe which grow very fast down there, versus indigenous trees. I think that has been sort of some tension about the suitability of that. And so institutes like ICRAF are critical for guiding the stakeholders about the correct trees to use in their farms, in their habitats, in their agroecology, because not everything can be grown everywhere. And I think that way, with the support of the research organizations and the extension system, farmers are able to see the benefit of embracing agroforestry, the benefits of protecting forests, and the benefits also of rehabilitating degraded forest. And I think projects like what you're being described with the private sector can go a long way in rehabilitating some of the degraded land which we have plenty of in Africa, but also it needs to be guided then by the research and development organization. And they have to be done in consultation with the communities to avoid conflicts.
Thank you very much. I mean, you mentioned already, that it's also decisive what kind of trees are actually planted. And Tilanun, since you are the expert on resilience, and since we're talking about very long-term projects, it takes a couple of years until a forest is actually grown. And then we have climate change, with less rain and extreme weather conditions that are becoming increasingly obvious. So what are what role does new technologies actually play, and also to really make those forests grow when it comes to water management, for example? Do you have some examples that you could share with us, best practices?
Yeah. Thank you very much. When we see areas in Africa where agroforestry has been part of the system for years, not for centuries, these are usually highland systems. And the highland systems have the advantage of having year-round or at least 6-7 months of rainfall. That's where food crops are prevailing. I mean, food trees, tree crops are prevailing. Fruit trees, economically, shorter-term economically attractive trees are becoming a component. And this is a very knowledge-intensive system because you have to know, what type of trees fitting where, what type of crop combinations, what type of management styles. But usually also, there's a lot of demand for biomass to make agroforestry work. Also, agroforestry then produce more biomass at the time. So there's always, a transition phase where really trees should be established and farmers should be really patient enough and invest on it. So the types of technologies and practices that should come in really to capitalize on these best practices one is really water management. How do you help farmers to capture the water, what is there in the rain, to efficiently utilizing it, and really using it to develop systems that are bringing in trees long-term. Because we in Agra keep saying, crop diversification is one of the most important resilience strategy, and diversification with perennials, with trees, is critical. And farmers who have those different options of combinations of crops are usually less fragile and less vulnerable. So what really is important about technology is how do you...
Inahun, I think we lost you, or is it just me?
One is helping farmers to identify niches. What is in the landscape and in the system? That's really one, really niche identification. And then, aligning niche identification with the appropriate species and appropriate variety. The second thing is really creating a market opportunity. So really an incentive for people to grow, they need to have markets for their produces, for their agroforestry produces. So unless farmers have immediate benefits, if it takes a long benefit out of it, no one's going to cover that transition is always the issue.
Oh.
The third thing is
sorry for interrupting, but maybe that fits very well to a question that came in from one of our listeners who says, once forests are established, different value chains are needed to use wood for driver function. This includes logistic networks, investment in the processing industry, and the development of know-how. And the question is, how can this be organized? I think you were just about to, mention certain aspects, but that's maybe also something where you, Andreas, can come in and say, because you mentioned it at the beginning, it's not only about planting the trees, but also that what comes with it. So the question is, how can it be organized that we have this value chain? Do you have recommendations or could formulate priorities that are needed to create those value chains?
Yeah. I mean, the good point is now we have a starting point. So we have the raw material being produced locally, but of course, also, as you said, building the value chain, but also this is investment heavy to build the plants you need for further construction, etc. And here, maybe to lift also on another level and to involve other responsibilities. So far, what we have done was mainly done, no, exclusively done via a private investment. And as I said, 30 million is good, but it's just a starting point. And I'm really looking at the governments, in particular also the German government, because they have in their political agenda that they would like to support and foster the economic development in Africa, and that they are supporting it. But now I'm also calling for support, and on different levels. So one thing is, so 30 million is good, but we need much more. So the German government also via its instruments like the KfW, etc., they could also be co-investors because we need to reach a specific volume. Only by that we will attract institutional investors. So we need, for example, 100 million. Only with that volume size, we can go also to pension funds, etc. So this is why I'm asking also the German government to join forces with the public sector to, at the end of the day, mobilize more private sources. And once we have started that, then coming back to your question, we can also start building the value chain, also looking at other investments, building on the raw materials we have just started. So it's a good point, but at the end of the day, and this goes back to something which Hamadi said at the very beginning of our meeting today, we can only solve all these points once we join forces, private sector, civil society, but also the government.
Thank you, Andreas. And I'm curious to hear actually what the government's response usually are when you do these calls. But Hamadi, I know you have to leave this call because you have to go to another meeting. So I would like to thank you very much for joining, for sharing your perspective. And Andreas, maybe you, coming back to your point, could elaborate a little bit more. I mean, when you call for more investment from the public side, and you said also there is a reluctancy still doing business in Africa. I mean, what are the reasons, do you think, from the German government why there is this reluctance or not more support? I mean, there are some programs, but apparently not enough to really scale it up and, you know, fulfill the potential that comes with forestry. So what do you hear when you call for more investment and engagement?
Yeah. Probably you have to ask them why they're not doing more. But now I'm in the field of guessing. Probably there are 2 points. One thing is also the German economy is currently going through a crisis. And of course, in particular, when it comes to spending from the governments, they are extremely cautious. To ramp up new programs is a very difficult thing in the current times. So probably it's not on the top of the list of their priorities. And this is something where we just have to do positive lobbying so that at the end of the day, also investments in that region are positive for the German situation. And secondly, even though we in this group are all committed that we need much more collaboration between the private sector and the governments, I have the feeling that sometimes a lot of players are still thinking in silos. So they think this is something which the state should do, but this is completely not connected to what the private sector does and vice versa. And so we have also to work on the mindset that really joining forces really on specific investment opportunities is beneficial for all of them.
Right. Thank you.
If I can come in here, Gregor.
Yes, please.
Yes. If you see successfully implemented projects, I could mention, for example, in Ethiopia, where they invested on sustainable land management, trees being component. You know, community forest management approaches have been very, very successful, rather than even external investments, whereby communities share the benefits, bring their products together. For example, you know, everyone having access to honey markets, and then honey through a cooperative brought to the market, somebody, the private sector, cleans it, pack it, and send it to markets like in Germany. Yeah? And so that communities then, reinvest in, planting trees, managing them, and really, sustainably investing on those resources. So I think creating the market opportunity in a really critical value chains and engaging, private sector and help communities to know what's the demand, what is the type of quality required, I think would take African farmers a long way, besides investments from Western governments like Germany.
I would still have many questions, but we are coming to an end. The time is running and there are still questions coming in from the audience. One from Raquel, who is asking, is there a space for R&D to work with, leverage local and indigenous knowledge of local contexts for advancing agroforestry systems? Is this perhaps already being done? And if not, what are key impediments standing on the way of such a collaboration? One question. I don't know if you see those questions, actually, Andreas and Tilahun, but I don't know who of you would like to.
Yeah, I can come in.
Yeah, great.
Africa is a very diverse continent. Yeah? So you move from the Sahel, very dry, water-scarce environment, to the high rainfall highlands of Congo, of Rwanda, and many in between. So the types of forests, agroforestry systems, along with the market opportunities, vary. But we really still are not in a position to identify the right mixes of technologies and approaches to develop the forest systems, these different farming systems, or the agroforest systems, different farming systems, be it from the species identification side, from the management side, even from the market opportunity side. So I see a lot of opportunity for our R&D to come in.
Andreas, anything to add on that question? Otherwise,
well, we are using state-of-the-art knowledge, but we are not ourselves doing R&D. I have to say very clearly, because this is a private sector initiative, but of course we are always open also, to the community. If there are ideas how to collaborate or how to do also R&D in our context, please reach out to us.
Then I would maybe like to close with one last question coming from Tanya, who says, since you mentioned decolonization, have you already noticed aspects that are different to Western European culture and, oh no, that question, where's that question? Here, to Western European culture, and where an education of investors and potentially some learning or a change in practice is needed? I'm particularly thinking about cultural differences. Maybe there are even opportunities to benefits that go beyond financial returns. Question from Tanya. Who would like to react on that one?
Well, I can take that. Yes, of course, there are differences. And the important point is A, to understand them, and B, also to use them as something, and that was also part of the question, as a learning journey for all of them. I'm per se an impatient person. Of course, the process of many years building trust is something which is not immediately my kind of doing businesses, but nevertheless, the team on the ground had the time and they invested the time, and now we see that we're talking a lot about sustainability. Probably this is key for really having sustainable business on the ground and a long-term perspective, because now we have the buy-in from all the different stakeholders, and so this is, I think, just an example for different cultures and a joint learning journey, which is hopefully beneficial for all of them.
Thank you. And since we still have 4 minutes, one last question from a participant. Will these forests be managed as protected areas? Will the local population be allowed to exploit non-timber and forest products?
Honestly, I don't know.
Yeah,
but you know, okay.
Perfect.
Sorry to cut you short. Please go ahead. I'll just time allowing. I'll come back.
Well, you have probably other examples. Honestly, I don't know what is the definition of protected areas. So of course we are using it for businesses, but as I said also earlier, the local communities are involved and they are also using it for their purposes. But I don't know how that is legally structured. But maybe you have another idea or examples from other regions.
Tilahun, something to add on that?
Yes. Yeah, for forests to be protected, the surrounding communities should have access to, forest-related woodlots, somehow access to some of these resources. So, the issue is farmers and companies are going to forests to look for alternative livelihoods. And unless those alternative livelihoods are somehow, achieved, the pressure on forests is usually very high. So, really engaging communities right from the beginning and planning, and helping them to bring in more woodlots in their landscapes, in their, gardens, in their home gardens, and their gullies, so that they reduce the pressure and get the benefits from the immediate vicinity without going to the forests, would be important. But at times, forests are also linked culturally, and so it's beyond markets. So at times, communities should be also part of that benefit too. Thank you.
Well, since we are running out of time, I would like to close this session. I guess it became clear that forestry is a complex issue with great potential and with many layers. We touched on some of them and explored the different functions sustainable forestry can play, talked about obstacles and chances and what it takes to its full potential. Thank you, Andreas, Tilahun, also Hamadi, who left already, for sharing your perspectives with us today. Thank you, everyone listening and participating in the discussion, for all the questions. To stay informed about our upcoming Global Perspectives on formats, as well as our other Global Perspective Initiative activities, I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter or follow us on LinkedIn to participate in future dialogues. Many, many thanks. And good luck, Andreas, at Tilahun, for your future work. And to all of you, have a great day. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Bye.